Okay, so hello everybody. Today I want to go over creating a Git repo from the very beginning, from the ground up, for a Unity project. I'm going to show you what's actually happening in the folder structure. I'm going to show you how that is reflected in SourceTree, and also the underlying Git commands that are happening underneath it all. So here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a repository to start with. Now, a repository isn't anything special, it is purely just a folder with a hidden folder called .git. So if we make a directory here in the command line, and we're going to call it git test, we should see that down here we've created a new folder, and now we're going to go into that folder. We're going to change the directory to git test. As you can see up here, we have tilde, the little squiggly line, on the desktop, and we're in git test. So we're on our desktop down here and we are in git test. The folder is completely empty. The tilde is a Linux shortcut that basically points to the user's home space. Okay, so at the minute we haven't got anything, we've just got a folder. We want to initialize a repository, and to do that on the command line we are literally going to type in git it, and that will initialize a Git repo. And as you can see down here, we now have a Git folder. Inside this Git folder is everything to do with the repository itself. If we remove this folder, we no longer have a repo, we just have a folder. Okay. You may find that this is a hidden folder because it's got a dot in front of it. You may need to go into your folder and search options, go into view, and make sure you're showing hidden files if you can't see that. Okay. So now what we can do is we can add in our SourceTree. So SourceTree is connected to it, and what we're going to do is we're going to add an existing working copy, which is the local version. And okay, we're going to point to the desktop, and we're going to point it to git test, and we're going to add that. Okay, so now we have an empty repo initialized with nothing in it. So the first thing you should always create, really, when you're starting a Git repository is a README. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick up Atom here, create a little text editor, and we're going to put this is a git test repository. Okay, and then we are going to save this, and we're going to save it in our git test folder, and we're going to call it readme.md. Okay. And as you can see, Atom has opened up this project folder, and we can see the .git folder here, and we can see the README has been created. Okay, so if we look back in our git test folder, we now have a README. If we look in SourceTree, SourceTree has picked up on the fact there is a file, but it's currently unstaged. It doesn't know anything about it. It's not versioned. And if we check git status, we can see again we have a file here, readme.md, that is currently untracked. So the first thing we want to do is to be able to get this committed so any changes can be reflected. Okay. Now when we're using Git, we need to be able to tell Git that to look up the changes for this thing, so we need to add it. And as you can imagine, we just need to type git add readme and then hit tab. Tab's a good shortcut key. Okay. So we've added it on the terminal, and you can now see in SourceTree that's just changes just been reflected, and it's now ready to be committed. You could do the same thing by clicking on the file, staging it, selecting it. That would do the same thing. Okay, so now we want to commit it, and to do that we just need to try git commit. Now this has opened up a text editor. Everything with a hash in front of it is a comment, so it will always give you feedback. This is the initial commit. Here are the changes. We've created a new file. It's called readme.md. So we are going to. So currently we're in editing mode. So I'm going to press the I key, and then we are now in insert mode down here, and we are just going to put created new readme for repo. I'm going to press escape, which takes me out of edit mode, and I'm going to press :X. It's a bit quirky. Okay, so as we can now see on SourceTree, it's disappeared, and we've now got a master branch, and look at the master branch, we now have a commit. So we've just created our README. So now if we edited something, so we're going to go back to Atom and we say, okay, we're going to put some hashes in front of this just to make it a bold heading. And we can see we now have an uncommitted change in SourceTree, and we now have a modified icon rather than a new file icon. And again, we could click on this, we could stage it, and then we can commit it. But again, we'll go through this process just so you can see it on the command line. We're going to go git status. So we can now say, rather than there being untracked files, there are tracked files when they've been modified. So all we need to do is do git commit again. There are no changes to currently commit. There we go. So we want to make sure we've added all of our changes. And then we can do our git commit. And as we can see, we've modified, so it's not new anymore, it's modified. So we've got, we need to go into insert mode by pressing I, and then we're going to have, we have made the title bold. And escape that. There we go, and we now have another commit in SourceTree ready to go. Okay, so now we've got that committed, we can commit, we can add new files, we can edit new files. What we want to now do is we're going to add our Unity project. So on my desktop, I've got a Unity test project, and all this is a new project I've created. I've added one scene that has a plane and a ball and a light, and then saved the scene as main scene and save the project and quit. So that's it, bare bones. So I'm going to copy all this lot and we're going to go into our Git repo and we're going to paste it. So now again in SourceTree we can see we have uncommitted things, and we've got all of the items in those folders. If we do git status, we'll find the same thing. We've got all these folders that have been created. Now the problem we've got is in our library is very individual to your computer. As you can see here, you've got metadata. Every time you edit something, you change something in Unity, that metadata is going to change, and it's not really reflecting a state in your project. So you don't really want to be committing this every time you make a change. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make sure it's ignored. We can do that through a process called git ignores, and to do that there is a file called .gitignore which we're going to be creating in the root of the repo, and it uses regular expressions to basically set what files and folders and content you do not want versioned. Okay, so to do that we're going to open Atom again, this time we're going to create a new file. And we're going to put a hash in just because this is a comment, and this is our Unity git ignore, and we have a file, and we're going to save this as, and we're going to save it as .git ignore, and we're in the root of the repo where our .git folder is. Okay, and we're going to save that. So if we now go back and we go git status, we now have our .git ignore in here as well. Currently I'm not telling the git ignore to actually ignore anything. So everything there is being committed, so we've still got our library folder and all of the metadata that's being committed. So what we do is we want to get rid of this library folder. So in our git ignore file, what we're going to do is we are going to say library, and this is going to ignore the entire library folder and everything to do with it. Okay. A good thing with regular expressions is if we put the L in square brackets, we can put a lowercase l, and what this will do is this will ignore library with an uppercase L and library with a lowercase l. So it's just a bit of safety checking just to make sure we get that ignored. Other useful ones can be objects. If you've got an object folder, that usually means something's compiling, it's a temporary thing. and to go with that, the temporary folder. Okay, you can also do things like we want to ignore all zip files and various other combinations of things, but we'll keep with that for the time being. So we'll save that. Back. Okay. So now we'll do a git status again. So can you see now here we have our library folder, and here we do not have a library folder. Now this is because Git is now reading this git ignore file and saying to ignore and not commit anything in the library. Now what we probably need to do is refresh this. There we go, and now SourceTree has picked up on the same thing. All of our library stuff has gone. So first off, let's get that committed. So we want to do a git add, and we're going to add down here .git ignore, and then we're going to, so as we can see in SourceTree, that's now been added, and we're going to do git commit. We're going to use a shortcut. We can use -m, which is for a message, and we're going to do add unity git ignore rules. Okay, so now if we refresh this again, our master has now moved on one, and we've added our unity git ignore rules. So we're nearly there. We've created our repository, we've created our readme, we've added our unity project, and we have told git ignore to ignore files we don't want. The last thing we need to do is commit all of our unity project itself. So to do that, we are going to do git add, and we are going to go assets /star, and this is going to add everything in the assets folder. So in our assets folder is main scene and the metadata, which is very important when you're trying to version things. So there we go, they've just been added, and then we're going to do git commit with a message of added main scene. Okay, and once again we've got another commit. So the idea of these commits is they should be atomic. They should be small changes, justifiable and understandable changes. Okay, if we just put the whole lot in, we can't separate out when the main scene was added, when the project settings were added, when we ignore the library. So we need to try and break this down. And the last thing we've got is we've got all of our project settings. So again, I could go git add, and then we can put project settings, and then that'll add all project settings. The same thing is to click on this, scroll down, shift click, and select all these, and then go stage selected. And then we're going to press the commit button, and we're going to do project settings for Unity. Cool. Commit. Okay. Either of those ways, they do exactly the same thing. Underlying all of SourceTree is just running the same commands we're running in this terminal window. Okay. So we're now completely up to date. If we go git status now, so there's nothing to commit, but tree is clean. There we go. We're on our master branch, but currently everything we've got only exists in this folder. So on our desktop, this git test folder is everything that this repo is. There's nowhere else. It's not any. You delete this folder, everything disappears. Okay, so we want to make sure that it's backed up in some way. Now, best way to do that is through Bitbucket or through GitHub or another Git hosting service. The way Git talks to another server is via a thing called remotes. So what you might have seen in a repository, and we go to the repository settings, it has this thing called remotes. And in here we add in the remote servers we want to be able to push to and pull from. Okay? Normally what you do is you'd go clone, we clone your repository, and then you put your Bitbucket ID in here. And when you clone all this, it will add this remote repository as your remote to push to. But we're going to break this down a little bit more and do it through the terminal here as well. So I'm just going to clear up this terminal a minute. We're just going to clear. There we go. So where we can do this is do this with Git Remotes. So Git Remote. There are no Git Remotes. So we're going to add a Git Remote. So Git Remote, add. And there's two components to this. The remote needs to have a name that you refer to it as, and it needs the URL for the server it points to. Now by convention, the way Git will normally add a remote is the name origin. This is the origin server where you get stuff from and you push stuff to. Okay, and then if you're using HTTP, you're going to go something like HTTPS, and then you're going to go whatever your username is, and that's at bitbucket.org, and then you're going to slash my username again, and then it's going to be your project.get add. So if we now go back to Git Remote, we can see we now have this origin. And if we now look in SourceTree, we now have a remote called origin. And just for safety's sake, we'll go into repository settings, and you can see here it's all been set up. This is where you usually get the thing where you're pushing and you're pushing to remote branch and you're pushing origin to master. Okay, that's what all the origin is just a name that points to where your server is. There is no reason why you can't have as many origins as you want. Remote, sorry. So we could go Git Remote, and we could add another remote, but we're going to call this one GitHub. And then we could go SSH git at github.com / my username / git test. Okay, now if we go Git Remote, we now have a GitHub remote and we have the origin. Okay, same here in SourceTree, and again for sanity, same here. So now we've done this, we've set up the connection between our local repo and our remote repo, and what we want to do is we now want to be able to push those settings from our local repository up to our server, and that's where our push comes in. Okay, so I haven't actually set up a repository, but we'll go through the motions. So do git push, and then we want the name of the remote we want to actually push to, which is where our origin comes in. So we're going to push to Bitbucket, and then you want the remote branch you're going to push to, and this is going to be master. So git push origin master. Okay, so we're going to be pushing all of our content, and we are pushing it to the remote server origin. The remote server origin is our Bitbucket Git repo, and we're pushing our local master branch up to the remote master branch. Okay, and this would be exactly the same if we went to push. And if you haven't ever pushed anything up to a remote branch, it won't exist. So we just want to click, make sure we push it. Okay, push, and it will head up. If I want to do this, now it will ask you to log in, provide your credentials, and then it will kind of push it up to the server. Okay, so there we go. Now if you then wanted to pull, again you press the pull button, and you're going to pull from the origin remote. You're going to pull from Bitbucket, unless you want to pull from GitHub, then you can just change it over, and then you're going to have the remote branch you want to pull. Now that is probably going to be master. You're pulling from the master branch to your local master branch. Okay, and then again, if we were to do this in the command line, we would do git pull, and we want to pull from our origin remote, which is our Bitbucket account again, and what is the remote branch we want to pull from, and that branch is going to be master by convention. Okay, so then we could hit go, and we'd get the same kind of credential pop up, and then we'd be able to synchronize our working copy with our local branches and then our remote branches. Okay, and all of this just exists in this .git folder. All of the configurations, the settings, the versioning is all done in this. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding about how to set up and what Git is actually doing in the background when you are creating and committing to a repo. Okay, thank you.